So we're going to wait for 2 minutes. We have Sudeep Ji with us, and waiting for everybody to join in. Uh, it's been 3 minutes since we started this, and in the meantime, let me tell you that there will be a constant. You can shoot me with your questions, and there will be a Q&A session at the end as well. But just let me remind you to keep it relevant, please. And if you ask a question, I will try to take it down when Sudeep ji speaks, and I will ask your question later on. So don't get worried that आपका question जो है वो मैं पूछ ना पाऊंगी ऐसा कुछ. Your question will be put up in all probability. So I'll just go ahead and start with the session now. So hello everyone. I welcome you all to this session on one of the key events in Indian history, a watershed moment, a game changer, the Battle of Plassey. The year is 1756, and it's been nearly 50 years since the death of the last great Mughal emperor Aurangzeb. The Indian political terrain has changed faster than expected. The throne of Delhi is weak and overshadowed by its minister Imad al Mulk. In Bengal, one of the most prosperous provinces of the empire, things couldn't be more different. It is here that trade flourishes like the Sundarbans. The Dutch, the English, the French all have their factories over here. And there are Portuguese and Armenian merchants as well. And they all compete ferociously for the prize that is Bengal. The relationship between the regime and the companies can be termed as an uneasy peace at best. But trouble is brewing. In 1756, the Nawab Ali Khan dies and leaves the Masnad to his grandson Sirajuddaulah. Siraj is young and he's fierce. From his seat in Murshidabad, Siraj finds that his power isn't entirely unchallenged. Let me now introduce you to the guest on our Masnad, Mr. Sudeep Chakravarty. And he is an award winning author of best selling works of narrative non-fiction like The Bengalis, A Portrait of a Community. His other notable works are The Red Sun, Highway 39, and Clare Hold Build. He's also an author of several novels. He's an extensively published columnist and has been in the media for 30 years now. I'm sure many of you are already aware of Mr. Sudeep Chakravarty's work. He's worked with the Asian Wall Street Journal, Sunday, the India Today Journal, India Today Group, I'm sorry, and HT Media. Sudeep ji read history at St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and declares it to be his amor prima, his first love. On behalf of our team at Tawari Khwani, we welcome you, sir, and it is an honor to have you with us.
Thank you very
Continuing with the.
Sorry, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. And Tawari Khwani is a burgeoning platform. It's a forum for history and culture. My name is Aamir Khan, and I'll be your host for the evening. And now to the main thing of the main thing. Sudeep Ji's book, Plassey, came out earlier this year. And what a fascinating book it is, I must say. I don't remember reading nearly 400 pages in 4 days straight ever before. And this isn't a novel, yet it's so gripping. Let's go straight to Sudeep Ji now. So 1757, greetings to you, sir.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here, ladies and gentlemen, brothers, sisters, young friends, if some of you are here with me. Welcome to my home in Goa. I wish you could visit, but this is where we are. And the visual you see on your screen now is actually set in Murshidabad in an area called Moti Jheel, where once upon a time there used to be this grand palace called the Moti Jheel Palace, which took its name from exactly the descriptor Moti Jheel, a lake of pearls, if you will, because there's a culture of pearls over there. And it belonged to a nobleman called Nawazish Muhammad Khan, who was married actually to a lady called Ghaseti Begum or Mehrun Nisa, uh, an aunt to Sirajuddaulah and a daughter to the Nawab Ali Wardi Khan. It is very interesting that I take these names because they are players in what I call the Plassey Theatre. And this, if you visit this area now, friends, you will see in the evening, towards the evening, exactly what you see on the screen, this grand tableau beautifully recreated, and it purportedly shows Sirajuddaulah going off to battle in Plassey in June 1757. But before we get that far, I think we can take this event, keep this event for later, and meanwhile tell you a little bit about what exactly was going on in Bengal at that time. As Aamir rightly pointed out, uh, it was a time of sort of flux. It was a time of relative unrest in India and definitely in Bengal. And let me quickly take you through that sort of scene setup, if you will, so that we're better able to understand the context of the Battle of Plassey and the context of what was happening in Bengal, what Sirajuddaulah, the Nawab, who fought the Battle of Plassey against British East India Company forces, led by Robert Clive, uh, what it's all about. So the context is important. So very, very quickly, Aurangzeb, the emperor, had died in 1707, but even before he died, there were cracks appearing in the Mughal Empire. I mean, let us not forget that at the height of Aurangzeb's power and at the greatest reach of the Mughal Empire, you had the Maratha chieftain Shiva, who is now called Shivaji or Chhatrapati Maharaj by those who adulate him. Uh, and he was the tearaway chieftain in Western India. And, and he directly challenged the Mughal Empire several times. When the emperor died, or Emperor Aurangzeb died, by the time he died, it was already very clear that there's going to be unrest happening all across India. There was no clear line of succession. There was no clear line of anything except imminent chaos. लोगों को पता था कि कुछ people, not just the rulers of, not just the Nawabs across India, the Rajas across India, but even the merchants across India. And definitely the European merchants who you've heard, there were the French there, the British there, the Danes, the Dutch, the Portuguese, they were all there. Everybody was keeping a lookout for what will happen after Emperor Aurangzeb dies. And the decades that followed was basically, some people call it the anarchy, like my good friend William Dalrymple. But I won't go that far. I mean, there was chaos, but I mean, it was an anarchy born, there was a chaos born of succession. It may have been chaotic in relation to the Mughal Empire, but let me assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that in relation to, say, the Deccan or the Dakhan, where the Nizam of Hyderabad was very much a breakaway, had become his own power, things were fairly stable there. And because he had already come into his own as a de facto independent Nawab. Murshid Quli Khan, after the death of Emperor Aurangzeb, by the second decade of the 1800s, 1700s, had become an independent Nawab of Bengal. So while the Mughal Empire was fracturing, there was consolidation happening in other parts of the subcontinent. So it's chaos. If you look at it with one lens, it's people taking advantage of that chaos to invest in their own future, in their own stability, in their own fortunes. So whenever there is a shift, there will be, I mean, it's happening today. It's happening as we speak across the world. People are trying to take advantage of a disadvantage of COVID-19. So why not in the 1700s? It's happened all through history. It happens. So this was what was happening in northern India. You had the Marathas becoming ever more powerful, and while the Wazir Imadul Mulk had a stranglehold on the empire, the Marathas were playing their own power game. They were consolidating themselves in Western India, in Central India, in Southern India, and definitely they were moving to Eastern India, right up to Bengal. In fact, अगर आप लोग मुर्शिदाबाद जाएंगे कभी, भागीरथी जो नदी है, उसके उस पार अगर आप जाएंगे तो वहां एक मंदिर मिलेगा आपको, एकलिंगजी महाराज का. It's made by the Marathis. So that's how close the Marathas came. They came to the opposite bank of the Bhagirathi River, जहाँ पे आज हजारदुआरी Palace जो है, within sight of the Hazarduari Palace, you will see a temple, a small temple to Eklingji Maharaj. That's really how close the Marathas came. And then you had the Sikhs in northern India, you had the Bundelkhandis, you had the Pathans in Rohilkhand, which is in sort of western UP of the present day. They were coming into their fore, and the Bengal Nawabship had very much become independent. So there was this jostling, there was this teeming, heaving political landscape in India, within which you had the economic landscape, because business and politics, I mean, people had to make a living. Trade was ongoing. Trade didn't suffer. Uh, all people were interested in doing was ensuring that they could secure their investments, they could secure their trade, they could secure their incomes, and they could secure their futures. What we do today was happening in the 1740s and 1750s. So
Right.
that is basically the setup. And Bengal was very important, as Aamir Bhai mentioned a little earlier, because
Amir,
it
please.
was, Aamir, thank you.
Right.
But you see, we are both brought up to be polite people, so we have to demonstrate it before we go ahead. Having said so, Amir, thank you very much. Um, Bengal was a hub because, I mean, it was a revenue center for the Mughal Empire for very many reasons. It was an easy place to do trade. Um, Bengal cotton was very important. It was world famous. Bengal Bengal silk was very important. It was world famous. Lac was very important. Lac was very famous in Bengal. Then saltpeter, which we have to make gunpowder as well as a preservative, was very important. Now Bengal supplied all of this. Bengal was also, because of its all its rivers, the vast river network was, I mean, it was very well connected. आप ढाका से कलकत्ता आ सकते थे, आप कलकत्ता से मुर्शिदाबाद जा सकते थे, आप हुगली से, from the Bay of Bengal, you could go right up the Ganga and turn left and go to Patna. You could go up the Ganga
Right.
and what is today's Brahmaputra, turn right and go to Guwahati, what is present day Guwahati. Bengal was incredibly well connected. And so it was it was all, I mean, and the Nawabs of Bengal, contrary to popular myths, was they were trading friendly. ये जो अफवाहें फैलाए जाते हैं कि the Nawabs of Bengal were not trading friendly, or Sirajuddaulah was not trading friendly. This is a complete myth. The Nawabs of Bengal, from even before the time of Murshid Quli. In fact, when Shaista Khan was the governor of Bengal, he was an uncle of Aurangzeb. So when Shaista Khan was the governor of Bengal in the 1680s, even then the British East India Company were fighting with the Mughal Empire, and its governor in Bengal, Shaista Khan. In fact, in Bengal, there is a phrase we have today, कि किसको ওনাকে এটা ওকে শায়েস্তা করতে হবে. It is derived from Shaista Khan, because
Shaista's name.
Shaista's name, because the British East India Company took on the Nawab of the Shaista Khan. Shaista Khan शाइस्ता किया ब्रिटिश लोगों को. In fact, they then went to Chittagong to try and take over Chittagong. वहां पे हारे, बुरी तरह हारे ब्रिटिश लोग, और वहां से बंगाल से इनको निकाला गया. फिर शाइस्ता खान साहब जब बंगाल से वापस गए दिल्ली के तरफ, तब
जी.
दोबारा ब्रिटिश लोग, ब्रिटिश ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी, जो उनके बाद जो एम्परर बने, सम्राट बने, जो बने आलमगीर साहब, उनके बाद, then they sort of, and towards the end of the reign of Aurangzeb, in late 1680s, they got the permission to set up Calcutta, which was established finally in 1690. So there's a whole history. It didn't begin with Siraj. It began several decades before Siraj. And there was always a samjhauta. There was always an understanding. There was tension. People came forward, they went back, but they carried on doing politics, they carried on doing business. And I think I should stop here, Aamir, and let you take us to another perhaps stage of the story, and then we can elaborate on this story a little later, perhaps.
No,
So,
definitely. You've covered two questions of mine actually, so I don't have
oh,
to ask those anymore. So, but
okay.
one part, obviously, you also added that there were companies that are trading over there. You have the British, you have other companies, you have the
Yes,
French,
yes.
and the Dutch. So, how about a little comment on those? कि just apart from the British के अलावा भी there were the
जी,
French और वहाँ Dutch भी थे. बहुत तो एक there's this competition going on over there. सब
mhm,
चाहते हैं कि हम
जी,
make good with the Nawab so that we get more rights, more trading rights, more
indeed,
monopolies. So
indeed.
what would you say on that
Well, yeah,
during that time?
It's absolutely right. In fact, it was it was the event in that time, and not just in Bengal. It was all across the subcontinent. It was all across Asia.
Definitely.
It was all across the known world, as the Europeans like to call it. उनके हिसाब से known world, the civilized world.
Known world,
But
right.
लेकिन हमारे हिसाब से तो हम तो थे ही वहाँ पे, तो we were known to ourselves, if you
Right.
will. So
Yeah.
and we were
We
known
don't
as
want.
fairly successful. We were known as fairly successful people. But just to set you up, the French and the British were competing in the Indian subcontinent at that point of time, very much so. In fact, from the 1740s onwards, the competition between the French and the British got very, very intense in India, and it happened in southern India. It didn't happen in Bengal in the beginning. It happened in southern India, in and around what is called the Carnatic, in the domain of the Nawab of Hyderabad, who was a vassal to nominally the vassal to the Mughal emperor, but he was pretty much his own boss. And the French, especially under a governor of theirs called Dupleix, began uh, for securing commercial interests, began to intervene politically by offering the French, the very well-trained French army, the infantry and the artillery, because at that time the European infantry, the European weaponry, the guns, the muskets, and the European cannons and the cannoneering techniques were the best in the world. And this technique belonged to the French. It was available to the British. It was available to the Dutch. Not so much to the Portuguese at that time because they had reduced in their influence. But these three main European trading powers who were also competing in Asia were had this thing, and the French and the British were by then already competing in North America. ये नहीं है कि सिर्फ Indian subcontinent में
Yeah,
उनका
fighting all over the
competition था.
world.
They were fighting all over the world for what? For influence, for domination, for commercial. At the end of the day, for business. So I keep saying that the Battle of Plassey was as much a business proposition as a proposition of politics. And when I talk about this, ladies and gentlemen and friends, you will understand why. Now, let me cut to chase to southern India. There is a famous battle, which we forget sometimes, called the Battle of Mylapore, which is called also the Battle of San Thome. It is
Indeed,
also
indeed.
sometimes called the Battle of Adyar, because it began in sort of Fort St. George, which was the base of the British Company of the Madras Presidency at that time, where just north of which is San Thome. Then the battle came further south in present-day Madras, Chennai, came towards the district of Mylapore, and then to the banks of the Adyar River, which exists to this day. And then that is how the battle progressed, and that is the battle has all these three names. So basically, what happened that the British and the French fought, fought already in 1746 on two counts. One is that the British and the French were already fighting in Europe because the Battle of the Austrian Succession had broken out, and France and Britain was on opposite sides. They were already fighting in North America, and that competition came to us in the Indian subcontinent at that time. The French लोग came from Mauritius with this big armada of ships, and with Dupleix and another gentleman called Labodone. अगर आप पौंडीचेरी पुदुचेरी जाएंगे तो इन जनाबों के नाम देखेंगे आप streets में, Rue de la Labodone and Rue Dupleix. You will see these names today. तो अगर आप जाएंगे तो anyway, तो ये लोग आए and they took on the British because the British were competition. So the French moved up north from Pondicherry, attacked Fort St. George, took over Fort St. George. They defeated the British. And this was an internal thing, but not quite so internal, as I will just explain. And the British were ransomed. They were literally, they had to treat, agree to humiliating treaties, so on and so forth. क्या हुआ इस बीच, इस दौरान कि जो अनवरुद्दीन साहब जो थे, the Nawab of Arcot, nominally liege vassal to Hyderabad, he came into an agreement with the French, saying that he was trying to play neutral, like Sirajuddaulah would do many decades later in Bengal, that he would try to balance the British and the French interests. Nawab Anwaruddin of Arcot was trying to balance it in the 1740s, but he decided that the French had an advantage. तो वो फ्रेंच के साइड में गए, कहे कि आप चलिए आप वो ले लीजिए, लेकिन I must be, you must share the spoils with me. तो डुप्लेस साहब
Because it's my
पहुंचे,
territory.
yeah, this is my territory, exactly. So I have to be, so I'm not coming overtly, but you have to cut me in on the action. तो डुप्ले साहब पहुंचे, लेकिन फिर अनवरुद्दीन जी को पता चला कि डुप्ले साहब वो जो इनके बीच में जो ट्रीटी जो हुई वो मानने नहीं वाले थे. So he got upset and sent his son Mahfouz Khan with a huge army to take over the French-controlled British fort of
Yeah,
St. George.
right. It's a
Then
triangle
what
now.
happened? Gee, so and then what happened is that Dupleix then had to fight his former ally. So the troops of the battle, the Nawab of Arcot, and the troops of the French East Indies Company fought in Madras, and the French defeated the Nawab of Arcot roundly. So the word went around. The European expertise and European strategy and tactics had defeated the Moorish, i.e., Muslim forces in this Indian subcontinent. So the Europeans were confident in their whatever, and so in many ways, friends, the Battle of Mylapore is called a trailer to the Battle of Plassey. कि जो 15 साल बाद, 16 साल, 10 साल बाद, 11 साल बाद जो पलासी में जो हुआ, उसका ट्रेलर 11 साल पहले मद्रास में हो चुका था. In the Carnatic, it had already happened. So this was happening, and the competition moved steadily northwards, northeastwards towards Bengal, where the British and the French were competing for political control of Bengal, to downplay each other, and therefore the commercial control of Bengal. Or 1750s mein, my last point before I hand it back to Aamir, is that
Sure.
there was another battle that I was expected to break out in Europe called the 7 Years' War. Again,
7 years.
where the French and the British were on either side, on opposite sides. And this broke out in May 1756. लेकिन उसका जो आभास जो था, उसका जो foreshadowing the feeling जो था, it was already obvious to the British and French company and the British and French forces present in India. यूरोप से यहाँ आने में 6 से 8 महीने लगते थे. तो round trip, you could say, for a year to 12 to 14 months. So people were clever. I mean, they were bright people. They knew what could happen. It was slow, but they knew what was going on. So both the British and the French companies and their forces were preparing to do battle in Bengal, which was the next stage of their command and control enterprise. और जो सिराजुद्दौला जी के साथ जो हुआ, ये कंट्रोल के हिसाब से हुआ, ये कंट्रोल के जरिए हुआ. ये, not these grand stories about what you hear, which I'm sure, and here I will stop because I give too much away right now.
Right.
And Aamir is a good raconteur, and he will give you the next teaser so we can go to the next stage of the Plassey ki kahani, if
The
you will.
story of Plassey, indeed.
The story of Plassey.
Right. So, very beautifully and briefly, you put up the context of Plassey, the template of Plassey, and how it actually happened. And इस पे मैं डायरेक्टली एक सवाल जो आपने ये बात की है उस पे ये पूछूंगा कि ऐसा नहीं है कि सिर्फ प्रॉब्लम्स लाइक यू मेंशन यूरोपियन डिसिप्लिन, यूरोपियन आर्मी, यूरोपियन मशीनरी, all of that had a clear advantage, and they found that out. Like what was this line that the immaterial has become immaterial? So it's something of that sort. So they found that out. Okay, we have a clear advantage, but there were clear advantages, maybe not so clear advantages, that the Indians could have had over the British or the French. There were gambling problems in European camps. There was a huge amount of corruption going on. जो
Yes.
लेजर्स में दिखाया जाता था उससे ज़्यादा पैसा कमाया जाता था, लेकिन they were all going into the company men's pockets.
जी.
So they could have used that. Why didn't they use that? And also, as Tipu Sultan later did, he employed French people to train his armies. Why didn't this idea strike, let's say, Anwaruddin, or for example, even Sirajuddaulah, or Ali Khan, or Murshid Quli Khan? Why didn't they think of this?
Well, it's a good point, but it's quite complex because it's not as if they didn't realize it. I mean, Anwaruddin did side with the French, thinking he'll benefit from the French. The French are already playing politics, and soon after that, the thing is that I don't think people saw the European commercial interest and their governments behind them. as necessarily threats at that particular point of time. They saw them as temporary allies in order to take on their own local competition. So they were used as mercenary forces for
True,
trading.
true.
It was like a quid pro quo. आप हमारे लिए ये करिए और हम आपको ये बेनिफिट्स देंगे. जैसे डुप्ले साहब को ये आर्केड के जब उनको दबाया गया तब उनको कर्नाटक का उनको ट्रेडिंग परमिशन मिला. Now when the British won over the French after Arcot, and as a run-up to, Robert Clive made his reputation in southern India by defeating the French in turn before Plassey.
Right.
So when the pendulum swung the British way, then the trade benefits also swung the British way. The French interest
Right.
diminished. So it was like a chess game, Aamir and friends. It was people were just interacting with each other. The same thing happened in Bengal, but Bengal was crucial for another reason. I mean, it became crucial for the East India Company, both the British and the French East Indies companies, and the others, because for them, the Bengal trade was in French, कहते हैं piece de resistance. This was
Peace
the main,
resistance. Right.
this was the main prize because कहा जाता है और इनके किताबों में लिखा गया है, and in their accounts and their testimonies, कि we could lose other parts of the Indian subcontinent, but we couldn't afford to lose the Bengal trade because the Bengal trade was the underpinning, underwrote the other trades. So Bengal trade was so profitable. It actually benefited the companies to a great disproportionate extent. So you couldn't lose Bengal. Bengal was literally the golden goose, not just for the people in Bengal, not just for the people in Delhi, not just for the Marathas, which is why they wanted shorts from the Bengal Nawabs in the first place, and and also the European. Nobody could lose this sort of prize. Everybody wanted the prize, and then they were playing off each other. Now Sirajuddaulah. So
Yeah, let's
Murshid
come to
Khan,
Sirajuddaulah
yeah,
now,
yeah,
right?
Murshid Quli Khan didn't need to. His son Shujauddin, who followed after him, didn't need to. Anwaruddin, Sarfaraz, who followed Shujauddin, didn't need to. Alivardi Khan, who deposed Sarfaraz to become the Nawab of
Sarfaraz Khan,
Bengal,
right.
Sarfaraz Khan didn't need to because he was powerful in his own right. In fact, he also sort of he was trying to balance the Marathas by trying to keep the British happy. अब कलकत्ता में आज भी आपको एक इलाका मिलेगा मराठा डिच कहते हुए. वो आलिवर्दी जी के टाइम में उनके रूल के दौरान उन्होंने खुद ब्रिटिश ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी को परमिशन दिया था कि आप ये डिफेंसिव मोड बनाइए ताकि मराठा कलकत्ता तक ना पहुंच पाए और फोर्ट विलियम सुरक्षित रहे. तो उन्होंने खुद ये किया था, permission दिया था. And Sirajuddaulah, growing up, didn't need to either. So, but they both realized, grandfather and grandson. After all,
Grandson.
Ali Khan was the grandfather of Sirajuddaulah, not the father.
Nana.
Was the Nana. In fact, he was a father to Amina Begum, Sirajuddaullah's mother. So, and Sirajuddaulah, I mean, both grandfather and grandson were intensely aware about the balancing act that they would need to play with the British and the French and the Dutch in Bengal. So
Right.
they were trying to balance the powers between each other. So ये नहीं है कि फट से सिराज निकल पड़े, गुस्सा होके कलकत्ते पे टूट पड़े, उनको निकाल दिया, इनको मार दिया, यहाँ से आए प्लासी में गिर पड़े, भाग गए वहां से. These are all like effects, if you will, but there is a cause. And I think we need to address the cause.
Address the cause. So let me
So,
get
okay,
straight to it, get past the context. We've had enough of the context now. तो अब हम आते हैं सीधा सिराजुद्दौला पे. We've had Murshid Quli Khan, then we have the greater Nawab, we have Ali Vardi Khan. Ali Vardi Khan के नवासे हैं सिराजुद्दौला. Ali Vardi Khan के अपनी हयात में he is seen as a rash individual. He is into all sorts of wrong things. ये वो शराबी भी हैं, कबाबी भी हैं, नवाबी भी हैं, सब कुछ कर रहे हैं वो. And he becomes notorious for being, even he acquires sort of a sadistic nature that you mentioned in the book as well. And then this incident happens that should I mention it, the Kasiti Begum incident, that
yeah,
so
please. Yeah,
So
yeah,
let's, that's the point where you first see कि हाँ, even the Siyar, the book that you have used as a resource, it
mhm,
mentions कि the Siyar is clearly not fond of Sirajuddaulah,
absolutely.
and absolutely not. And then
Mm,
so what I would like to what I would like you to touch on would be
mm,
Siraj as a grown up, and then
mhm.
Siraj after the death of Ali Wardi Khan, and let's just start taking it from there.
Okay.
Sirajuddaulah.
Again, thank you for that lead in. And I'll be again very brief, friends, because it's a vast story. We don't have
It's a
too
very
much
vast
time.
story. Yeah.
I'll just keep it as brief as possible. But so it'll be like more like a jhalak. It'll be a glimpse than anything else. So, but here it is. Now, Sirajuddaulah was clearly the favorite grandson, and we had of Ali Wardi Khan, and Ali Wardi Khan had two grandsons. There was a boy called Ikram Ad-Dola, who was given the title of Ikram Ad-Dola. Now, what happened is that when there was a bit of an age difference between Siraj and Ikram Ad-Dola, but Siraj was clearly Ali Wardi's favorite. And Ghaseti Begum, Mehrun Nisa, uh, Ali Wardi's eldest daughter, didn't have children. So she and her husband Nawazish Muhammad Khan adopted Ikram Abdullah formally, and Amina Begum was happy to say it. Her, their father was happy with it, but and Ghasiti Begum always wanted Ikram Abdullah to become the Nawab. She didn't like Sirajuddaulah from the time Siraj was a youngster, and Ghasiti Begum, in any case, like in the old days, you wanted your child to take over as the Nawab or the king or the Sultan or the Raja. It was a thing. It happens to this day. So it was no surprise then. And what happened is that then Ikramadullah died when he was quite young. And then I think Ghasidi Begum's dislike for Siraj grew even more. And Siraj was aware of that. Now, what happened is that, there's a difference between Siraj as he was, from what we gather, and Siraj as he was made out to be. Now, Siraj, to my mind, was like a spoilt brat. I mean, he was the ladla of Ali Bardi
Probably.
Khan, if you will,
Mm.
and he grew up as an entitled man about town. अगर आप आज कलकत्ता जाएंगे, लखनऊ जाएंगे, ढाका जाएंगे, या तो wherever you could, and maybe I shouldn't use the word Lucknow because there's a land of great entitlement these days. But jokes apart, when you go to these areas, you have entitled children of entitled people who are politicians and rulers and business people who strut about the town as if they own it. And Sirajuddaulah literally owned it because his grandfather was a Nawab. So he and his
Definitely.
friends would go about like, like आजकल SUV में लोग निकलते हैं. तो
घूम
he
रहे
would
होते
go
हैं जी.
घूम रहे होते हो तो घोड़े पे निकल के ये वो करके जो मर्जी करते थे. लेकिन ये कहा जाता है कि Sirajuddaulah was so cruel that he would pick men, women, and children up from the streets of Murshidabad and go and force them to have sex with him, would rape them, and to the extent that he would take out boats. I mean, there would be boats on the Bhagirathi and the Ganga, and Siraj would sit on the banks and deliberately drown men, women, and children
Mm.
for his personal entertainment. This is rubbish. I mean, I'm in civilized company, so I can't use harsher words. Privately, मैं तो गाली देना शुरू कर देता अब तक. तो अभी सियारुल मुतकरीन में जो तबत भाई साहब ने जो कहा है, और बाद बाकी अभी हाल में जो विलियम साहब जो हमारे कॉलीग जो हैं वो भी कहे हैं कि सिराज was this, Siraj was that. They all go to this one source, Siyarul Mutakirin, which is not a validated source, and Siyarul Mutakirin in turns goes to one source of its own, which is like an uncorroborated evidence by a Frenchman called Jean Law. That's it. और इनके अलावा और कहीं नहीं कुछ लिखा गया, and not even subsequently, not in any way. And why would Ali Wardi Khan, who was a wise Nawab, jeopardize his own rule by having Siraj do cruel things to his rayat, his subjects, on whom he would depend, and he would advise everybody, saying that you have to look after your riots because your revenue comes from them, your taxes come from them, your business comes from them, your treasury is dependent on them. So only a
Okay.
fool would let this. So I have a problem with it. So शराबी तो जरूर थे, लेकिन ये कहा जाता है कि जब अलीवर्दी खान साहब was on his deathbed, Siraj took a vow of abstinence and he didn't do anything after that. But so I think he was not a foolish boy. He was not. He was maybe rash. He was young. देखिए नवाब जब बने थे मसनद पे, बंगाल के मसनद पे जब आए वो 23 साल के थे जब
23 साल के थे।
जी पलासी के जंग में वो 24 साल के थे जब उनका खून किया गया, उनको मर्डर किया गया 2 जुलाई 3 जुलाई 1757। वो 24 साल कुछ दिन उनका उम्र था। तो अभी वो आज के हिसाब से सोचिए, कोई पोस्ट ग्रेजुएट लड़का हो लड़की हो, वो क्या क्या झेल रहे हैं। मराठा के इन्फ्लुएंस झेल रहे हैं, अपने खाला के मौसी का पॉलिटिक्स झेल रहे हैं। मीर जाफर साहब जो मीर बख्श पोस्ट से निकाले गए, सिराज ने निकाला उनको, उनका कंस्पिरेसी झेल रहे हैं। जगत सेठ जो
जी
बैंकर्स थे, उनका कंस्पिरेसी और उनका गुस्सा मैनेज कर रहे थे वहां, और ब्रिटिश और फ्रेंच के कंपटीशन मैनेज कर रहे थे। और ये जो ब्रिटिश जो फोर्ट कलकत्ता में फोर्ट विलियम पे जो वो उनके हरकतें जो चल रहा था, जो आप जो कहे ना कि उनके लेजर्स भरे गए थे बेनामी ट्रांजैक्शंस में, Benami transactions is what? Basically, it goes to the British and not to the Treasury. That is basically the exception that Siraj took. And he
right
specifically told the British that do not build your fortifications on my land, on my territory. I am the Nawab of Bengal, and you are fortifying Calcutta. You are fortifying your factory in Murshidabad. You say it's against the French, but how do I know it won't be used against me? And there, the French were fortifying. And so these are not the signs, this is not the sign of a brash idiot. These are signs of a 23-year-old person who may have been impulsive, who may have been, young, but he was not a fool.
stupid.
I don't think he was stupid at all. And their records prove it. And which records? Not Sierra Mutakirin, East India Company records, fresh in these company records. They all look.
We will come to that.
Yeah, we'll come to that in a little while. We'll come to that in a little while.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, what I don't get is if he indeed was that stupid, the English didn't have to, go through this entire war and this entire conspiracy to put him down. They could have just might, easily done something very simple and बहुत आसानी से उनको हटाया जा सकता था. If someone uh, is presenting a clear opposition, he's being defined, he's come of age now, and he has a plan. So obviously he's a difficult person to deal with. He's not that easy.
Yeah.
So obviously, so now we have the figure of Siraj in front of us, and
Yeah.
now let's move on to the points that emanate from Siraj. So
Right.
the first thing that I would like to touch on, that एक बैकग्राउंड में बता दूं कि सिराज जो हैं वो यहाँ पे गद्दी पे आते हैं, और उसके बाद फौरन शौकत जंग साहब जो हैं, जो पूर्णिया में उनके राइवल हैं, जो कज़न भी हैं उनके, वो को कहते हैं कि नहीं, आई एम द नवाब, एंड ही डिस्प्यूट्स हिज लीडरशिप एंड हिज नवाबियत, एंड दे हैव दिस जंग लेटर ऑन, एंड उसमें उनकी लड़ाई भी होती है जिसमें शौकत जंग इज प्रेजेंटिंग ही इज अ क्लियर राइवल, बट इट डजंट वर्क फॉर शौकत जंग, ही डाइज ऑफ. एंड लेकिन मज़े की बात यह है कि इस जंग में everybody's loyalties are tested now, and from Mir Jafar to the Jagat Seths, everybody is like, who do I bet my money on? So let's talk about these people at the
Sure.
court of Sirajuddaulah. There's
All
the
right.
I would like you to touch on on Mir Jafar, on the Jagat Seths, which is अपने आप में it is a big topic. और फिर we have the उसके अलावा कौन है, ओमी चंद है, we have ओमी चंद,
ओमी चंद है,
and we have
घसेटी
the
बेगम है, खुद घसेटी
घसीटी
बेगम
बेगम
है.
है, and the loyal ones,
Yes.
including the
Yes.
loyal ones. So उनके
Including
बारे
that.
में आप कुछ let's
जी.
briefly cover it up in five
Brief.
minutes.
Yeah, briefly again. Thank you. See, again, friends, it's very important to understand, which is again a myth of Plassey. It is a colonial myth, and it's a modern Indian history myth as well. The fact is that the British, Robert Clive and the British East India Company stepped into almost a ready-made sort of a template, if you will, of conspiracy, which was already present in Murshidabad. When Siraj became Nawab after the death of Ali Wazir Khan in April 1756, the first thing that the court did was to, or the courtiers did, including Ghasiti Begum, Mir Jafar, and others, Rai Dullah Brahm and other people in court, and the bankers Jagat Seth, was to try, and but most particularly Mir Jafar and Ghasiti Begum, was reach out to Siraj's cousin, who was a Nawab of Purnia and the nominal vassal to Siraj, and say that you should come, you are the claimant, you should come to Siraj. So in May 1756, Shaukat Jung actually begins to move his army towards Murshidabad, and Siraj replies by moving his own army towards Purnia. And Shaukat Jung panics, backtracks, writes a letter of apology to Siraj, and goes back. And Siraj then is incensed because with the British, and by then he moves towards Calcutta in June 1756, takes over Calcutta, throws the company out, and then the whole other domino begins to happen when the British come back to Bengal, get to reclaim Calcutta, and then the conspiracy for Plassey begins to happen as late as April 1757. Before April 1757, there was no formal talks about, the formal draft of the treaty or the conspiracy of the Battle of Plassey. So when Robert Clive and his agent in Murshidabad, the company agent in Murshidabad, Mr. Watts, was there, Watts was feeding the Calcutta court and the company information about what was going on in Murshidabad. He's the one who saw it all happening in front of his own eyes, like the French did. And they were advising their respective companies, saying, this is the equation, these are the players, these are who we have to fight with, these are who we have to fight against, these are our potential allies, these are so on and so forth. So they were ranging against this group that had Jagat Seth, that had Ghasiti Begum, that had Mir Jafar, that had Rai Durlab Ram, and also another gentleman called Yar Latif, who actually wanted to be a Nawab before Mir Jafar became the consensus candidate, if you will, to be a Nawab after Sirajuddaulah. So this conspiracy was already active. Only in April was the proposal to make Mir Jafar to Nawab actually come through. In May, the Plassey conspiracy treaty got signed with Omichand and others as bearing witness, and so on and so forth, and Mir Jafar putting his signature to it, Robert Clive on the other hand. Now, this is as late as 1757, friends. So, it is a myth to say that it all happened because of Sirajuddaulah, and it all happened. The situation had already presented itself. Siraj was already battling a conspiracy, live conspiracy, for his entire rule in Murshidabad, even before Robert Clive arrived in Calcutta in January 1757. उसे 6-8 महीने तक तो सिराज अपने मुर्शिदाबाद में तो इनके साथ तो आप कह सकते हैं कि उनके मसनदी जंग कर रहे थे.